Okay, so you want to own a KFC. You buy some chicken, throw it in a fryer, sell it for a few dollars more, and watch the money roll in. At least that's what it looks like from the outside. But KFC isn't some small chicken shop. In 2025, KFC had 33,897 restaurants across 149 countries and territories, generating about $36.4 billion in system sales. And almost 99% of those restaurants were franchised. That's roughly $100 million in KFC system sales every single day. But here's the part that's easy to miss. That $36 billion isn't KFC's profit. It isn't even KFC corporate's revenue. Most of that money is generated inside thousands of restaurants operated by franchisees. And if you want to open one yourself in the United States, KFC's 2026 franchise disclosure puts the estimated investment for a newly constructed traditional restaurant at roughly $2.1 million to $4.2 million. The initial franchise fee is $45,000, while the disclosed ongoing royalty is 4% of gross sales, and the brand fund contribution is 5.8%. So you're not buying a fryer and a chicken recipe. You're potentially putting several $1,000,000 into a machine that has to sell chicken every single day just to justify the investment. And that's the real economics behind KFC. Because the biggest number in this business isn't the price of a bucket. It's the amount of revenue you can push through one location without allowing your costs to eat everything. Understand that, and you understand KFC. Miss it, and you can own one of the world's most recognizable restaurant brands and still have a terrible business. The reason this industry exists is actually pretty simple. People are hungry. But hunger isn't the whole story. You probably think the average KFC customer is simply buying fried chicken because they want fried chicken. The real product you're buying is convenience. You're paying someone else to buy the ingredients, prepare the food, cook it, package it, and hand it to you in minutes. You don't need groceries. You don't need a kitchen. You don't need to wash dishes. And you already know what you're getting before you walk through the door. That's extremely valuable. And it's why fast food can survive even when consumers are under financial pressure. When people have less money, they may cut expensive restaurants, they may travel less, they may cook more, but they still need food, and quick service restaurants compete directly for that everyday spending. KFC also has something most independent restaurants would love to have: scale. By the end of 2025, KFC had opened more than 4,500 gross new units across the Yum Systems concepts, with KFC itself finishing the year at nearly 34,000 locations. KFC's system sales grew 5% in 2025, while core operating profit grew 9%. And the growth isn't happening equally everywhere. In the first quarter of 2026, KFC's system sales grew 5% outside foreign exchange effects, but the United States was down 2%, while markets such as Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and India were growing much faster. That tells you something important. KFC isn't one business. It's thousands of local businesses operating under one global brand. And there are basically three ways you can think about the economics. First, there's the traditional standalone restaurant. This is the big KFC you probably picture. A building, a kitchen, a drive-through, parking, dining space, employees, signage, and a lot of expensive equipment. This gives you the most control, but it also gives you the biggest investment. Then there are converted or remodeled locations. Instead of building everything from scratch, you take an existing or former KFC location and bring it back into operation. The 2026 FDDD estimates the investment for a reopened, remodeled, or converted KFC at roughly $1.2 million to $2.8 million. That's dramatically cheaper than building a brand new restaurant. But you're also dealing with an existing building, existing infrastructure, and potentially expensive renovations. Then there's the multi-unit operator. And this is where the model becomes much more interesting. If you own one KFC, you own a restaurant. If you own 10, you start building a restaurant company. Your management costs can be spread across multiple locations. You can develop specialized employees. You can centralize administration. And a strong location can help support the organization around weaker ones. But you've also multiplied your exposure. One bad location is a problem. 10 bad locations is a disaster. So how does the basic machine actually work? You invest capital, you secure an approved location, you build or convert the restaurant, you hire employees, you buy food and packaging, you sell chicken, sandwiches, sides, drinks, and other approved menu items. Customers give you money, then that money starts disappearing. Chicken gets paid for, oil gets paid for, employees get paid, rent gets paid, utilities get paid, insurance gets paid, repairs get paid, advertising gets paid, KFC gets its franchise-related payments, and whatever survives becomes your operating profit. That sounds simple, but there's one number that matters more than almost anything else. Sales volume. Not just how much you charge, how many transactions you can push through the restaurant. Because your rent doesn't care whether you serve 300 customers today or 500. Your building is still there. Your fryers are still there. Your insurance bill is still there. Your management structure is still there. That creates operating leverage. Let's build a hypothetical KFC. And remember, these numbers are an illustration, not KFC's published average unit economics. Suppose your restaurant serves 500 customers a day. Your average transaction is $14. That's $7,000 in daily sales. Multiply that by 360 operating days, and you're looking at about $2.52 million in annual revenue. Sounds incredible, but now the money starts getting split. Let's assume, purely for illustration, that food and packaging consume 30% of sales. That's about $756,000. Now suppose labor costs you another 27%. That's roughly $680,000. You're already down $1.44 million. Then comes rent and occupancy. Let's assume $200,000. Utilities, insurance, repairs and maintenance might take another $150,000. Now you're at roughly $1.79 million in expenses. And remember, you haven't even accounted for every possible cost. You still have franchise-related payments and advertising. Using the 2026 disclosed 4% royalty and 5.8% brand fund contribution as a simple illustration, 9.8% of $2.52 million would be about $247,000 before the separate technology fee and other costs. Now you're getting close to $2.04 million in expenses. That leaves around $480,000. And that's before taxes, financing costs, depreciation, and whatever other expenses your particular restaurant has. So maybe your operating economics look pretty good. But now let's change one number. Instead of 500 customers a day, you only get 450. Your average ticket stays at $14. Your annual sales fall from $2.52 million to about $2.27 million. That's a $252,000 drop in revenue. But your rent didn't fall by $252,000. Your insurance didn't fall. Your building didn't shrink. Your fryer didn't get cheaper. Your management costs didn't disappear. That's why restaurant ownership is so dangerous. A small change in sales can create a much bigger change in your actual return on investment. And the opposite is also true. If you can push more customers through the same building without dramatically increasing your fixed costs, those extra sales can be extremely valuable. That's why the best KFC location isn't necessarily the one with the cheapest rent. It's the one where the relationship between sales and occupancy cost makes sense. A location that costs you $200,000 a year but generates $3 million in sales can be much better than a location that costs $100,000 but only generates $1 million. Cheap isn't always profitable. Productive is. Now, getting into this business is another story, because KFC doesn't simply hand you a bucket and say, good luck. The 2026 FDD estimates a new traditional KFC at $2,107,575 to $4,155,000. That includes everything from real property and building costs to equipment, signage, technology, permits, insurance, inventory, and working capital. Real property alone is estimated at roughly $300,000 to $1.2 million. Building and site costs can run from about $1.2 million to $2 million. Equipment, signage, decor, point-of-sale systems, and required technology can add roughly $425,000 to $650,000. And then you have inventory, insurance, training, permits, professional fees, and additional funds for the opening period. And here's something first-time owners often underestimate. The restaurant can be ready before the business is ready. You can have a beautiful building and still have no customers. You can have all the equipment installed and still be losing money. You can open on Monday and discover that your labor schedule is wrong by Wednesday. And if construction takes 3 months longer than expected, you're potentially carrying costs without collecting restaurant revenue. That's why working capital matters. You're not just paying to open, you're paying to survive until the operation becomes predictable. Then there's the legal and regulatory side. You need an approved site. You need local permits. You need health and food service approvals. You need construction approvals. You need insurance. You need to comply with KFC's operating standards. And depending on the location, zoning, traffic access, signage restrictions, and drive-through requirements can turn a seemingly perfect property into a useless piece of land. So let's say you somehow clear all of that. You spend $2.5 million. You open, and customers actually show up. What can you make? This is where you need to separate KFC the corporation from KFC the restaurant. In 2025, the entire KFC system generated $36.4 billion in sales, but Yum! Brands reported only about $1.06 billion of KFC company sales because most KFC restaurants are franchised. KFC's franchise and property revenues were about $3.47 billion across the broader system. That's the franchise model in action. KFC doesn't need to collect every dollar from every bucket. It can build an enormous network where franchisees operate the restaurants and the brand participates through royalties, advertising, property, and other franchise-related economics. And that's why franchising is so powerful. Imagine you owned every KFC yourself. You'd have to finance tens of thousands of buildings, hire hundreds of thousands of employees, manage thousands of local operations, carry enormous capital requirements. Instead, the franchise system lets other operators put their own capital and labor into expanding the network. At the end of 2025, 99% of Yum's KFC restaurants were franchised. That's not a coincidence. That's the business model, and the digital side is becoming increasingly important too. Yum Brands said its overall digital system sales approached $40 billion in 2025, up about 20% year over year, showing how much the restaurant business is shifting toward mobile ordering, delivery, and technology. For you as a franchise owner, that means your competition isn't just the restaurant across the street anymore. You're competing for attention on someone's phone. You're competing with delivery apps. You're competing with promotions. You're competing with Chick-fil-A, Popeyes, Wingstop, Raising Cane's, and thousands of independent restaurants. And customers can switch with almost zero friction. That's why a famous brand doesn't automatically guarantee a profitable location. The brand can get you into the consideration set. Your location, pricing, service, food quality, and operating discipline determine what happens next. So should you actually own a KFC? If you have $100,000 in a dream, probably not. You're looking at an investment that can exceed $4 million for a new traditional restaurant. If you're heavily dependent on debt, a mediocre location can become a financial nightmare very quickly. But if you have substantial capital, strong restaurant experience, good real estate judgment, and the ability to operate at scale, the model becomes much more interesting. Because you're not really buying fried chicken. You're buying a system. You're buying a globally recognized brand. You're buying recipes, operating procedures, marketing infrastructure, technology, and a customer base that already knows what the name means. But none of that eliminates the fundamental rule of restaurant economics. You still have to sell enough food, at a high enough average ticket, at a high enough frequency, with enough margin left after the costs. And that's the paradox of KFC. From the outside, it looks like a chicken business, but underneath it's a high-volume real estate, labor, supply chain, and franchise business that happens to sell chicken. The $36 billion global number sounds enormous, and it is, but you don't own $36 billion in sales. You own one location, one building, one P&L, one lease, one team, and one very expensive machine that has to keep selling chicken every single day. So the next time you walk into a packed KFC, Don't just look at the bucket. Look at the economics. Look at the customers. Look at the average ticket. Look at the rent. Look at the labor. Look at the franchise fees. And ask yourself how many orders that restaurant needs every day before the owner actually makes a dollar. Because KFC didn't become a global giant by making a fortune on one bucket of chicken. It built a system that could sell billions of dollars worth of chicken through thousands of locations. And that's the real lesson. The money isn't just in the chicken, the money is in the system.